Welcome to Dictators v Democrats. I am Theo Althorpe Mullis, and this is my co-host, Eric the Democratic Dragon. This is the Democracy Briefing, where we go through the news this week in the struggle against authoritarianism around the world. If you believe in freedom, liberty, and human rights, then do like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below. On to the El Salvadorian front, where opposition Congresswoman Marcela Villatoro didn't mince her words. Democracy has died in El Salvador. That's after a controversial constitutional reform gave President Nayib Bukele the power to seek indefinite re-election. The bill was rubber-stamped through Parliament, 57 votes to 3. Bukele's Nuevas Ideas party, of course, controls 90% of the seats. Eric. The new law extends presidential terms from 5 to 6 years, brings the next presidential election forward from 2029 to 2027, and scraps the second round of voting in these elections altogether. Oh, and of course, no more presidential term limits. Government lawmaker Suesi Callejas said, "The Constitution isn't untouchable. What should be untouchable is the will of the people." Right. Bukele's notorious Sisot prison, which is now opened to US deportees with no ties to El Salvador, thanks to President Trump, has drawn enormous condemnation from human rights groups for years. Yes, he has cut violent crime in the country, and yes, that's made him wildly popular. But many fear that we're watching the same authoritarian playbook we've seen elsewhere. Popularity, then consolidation, then dictatorship. And Juanita Gobertus, the America's Director for Human Rights Watch, says El Salvador is traveling down the same path as Venezuela. It starts with a leader who uses his popularity to concentrate power, and it ends in dictatorship. Bukele says he won't run again. Nobody believes him. He doesn't. Let's head to the American-Russian front, where things have gotten really Cold War lately. On social media, of course. Donald Trump and former Russian president, vodka enthusiast, and Twitter warrior Dmitry Medvedev have been trading blows online. And that's before Trump dropped this gem. Quote, "I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions near Russia, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. Thank you for your attention to this matter." Medvedev had earlier referenced Dead Hand, Russia's Cold War era system that automatically fires nukes if it detects a nuclear strike. No human needed, just completely reliable Soviet era computers. Wonderful. Well, we still don't know if this system actually works. Like many Russian systems, it could be just bluster. And Trump's post isn't necessarily policy, it's sabre-rattling. The US has 14 Ohio-class strategic missile submarines, boomers. These are the ones that carry the nukes. Some are always near Russia. That's normal. What isn't normal is Trump's shift. He's previously offered the Russians nearly everything when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Acceptance of Russia's occupation of Ukrainian territory, de facto acceptance, what they got now. No NATO membership for Ukraine, and even recognition of illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. Overall, it was pretty fawning, pretty grim, and made him look like Putin's. Putin still said no. He still bombs Ukrainian cities. I was there during the really heavy strikes in Kyiv on the 31st. It was awful. And according to reports, Melania, Trump's wife, reminds him of this regularly. Because you can always trust an Eastern European to know exactly what Russia is. So no, Trump's not a champion of democracy, but he does hate looking weak. And Putin is making him look like a loser. And Putin had so many cards when it comes to President Trump, and he's lost a load of them. Now onto the are you are you okay? You're a good boy. Onto the Ivory Coast front, where President Alassane Ouattara has announced that he'll run for a fourth term. Of course, a 2016 constitutional change removed term limits. This is because, he says, of unprecedented economic and security challenges. Ibrahim Anoba of the Atlas Network told AP, we might be sliding back to that era of old men, old guard dictator rule in West Africa. And unfortunately, that seems like it might be true. Ivory Coast was once seen as a model of stability and democracy in Africa. Now elections are being described as status quo only. Opposition parties are boxed out and institutions are captured. And since 2020, 8 coups have taken place across West and Central Africa. Russia's influence is also growing fast. In many post-coup countries, regimes trade loyalty to Moscow in exchange for security assistance in maintaining their power. And in comes the appropriately named Africa Corps, formerly Wagner, at least before Wagner's old boss, Prigozhin, pissed off Putin enough to get a bomb on his airplane. They come in, they run the mines, the oil, the gold, and they keep the dictator in power through whatever means necessary. In other words, imperialism. This time, though, from men with snow on their boots. Now to terra firma, the planetary front. The battle to save the planet well, because there's no liberty in the ashes. Here we go to Geneva, where negotiations over a global plastics treaty are kind of stuck. Back in 2022, the UN launched the INC, the International Governmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution. Ooh, what a name. With the aim of finishing a legally binding treaty by last year, 2024. Now, deadlock. And 2 camps have emerged. First, the High Ambition Coalition. What a name. 100 plus countries that want a cap on plastic production and a ban on toxic chemicals. And second, the like-minded countries, including such gems as Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, Iran, India, Brazil, and the United States. But let's just call them what they are, the polluters. They want a voluntary treaty, only on waste management and some recycling. And they've been using procedural tricks and obfuscation to delay any progress on the treaty. And over 100 nations are now saying no treaty is better than a weak one. Neil Tangri, science and policy expert at Gaia, put it this way. INC 5.2, what a wonderful UN name, could yield a strong treaty, a weak treaty or frustration, leading to a shift in negotiations to outside the UN. It's a mess, but there is some hope, because the numbers, they're on the side of those who actually want to save the planet. Now some quick hits from other fronts. On the Bangladeshi front, 1 year since the revolution that ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, still no progress on a new government or elections, and increasing frustration. And on the Myanmar-Thailand front, a bit of good news. A ceasefire is now in effect between the two, after border clashes escalated over imperial borders, essentially, that France drew in the early 20th century and the control of a key temple site. And finally, the Australian front. Shout out to the Aussies, hailed in Financial Times as a letter from Perth, as a rare bright star among the democracies. And to close out, the culinary front. After a 15.5-hour coach ride from Kyiv to Krakow, with 1 toilet stop and 1 food break, and no idea how long we were going to be there at any of the stops, so I didn't want to get off, I admit it. McDonald's, sometimes you are just needed. Blessed relief in that burger and chips. And pro tip for anybody traveling to Ukraine, if you're going to go to Kyiv from Poland, take the train. That's it for this week's Democracy Briefing. If you found this valuable, if you found it enjoyable, if you found it informative, give it a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment where you think democracy is at risk next. And stay safe, stay sharp, and remember, democracy is non-negotiable. Thank you.